The scent of industrial lemon disinfectant and ammonia was the perfume of his nights, a harsh chemical counterpoint to the ghost of Genevieve's expensive fragrance that still haunted the 80th floor. In the hollow heart of Axiom Dynamics, Caleb Hayes stopped existing. Here he was, Art, a man defined by the squeak of a rogue wheel on his janitorial cart and the soft hiss of a mop skimming acres of polished Italian marble. The tower slept like a silent giant. Fiber optics and stock tickers lay dormant, leaving only the low, omnipresent hum of climate control. He pushed the cart with practiced economy, welcoming the dull protest in his lower back. The ache was honest, something tangible in a life that had become an abstraction of valuations and boardrooms. Beyond the tinted glass, New York glittered like a galaxy he owned a piece of and still didn't belong to. He could even spot the warmer glow of Queens, where his father's grease-stained hands had taught him to fix what was broken. Up here, in this sterile monument to success, Caleb felt like a ghost haunting his own kingdom, mopping toward the executive suites with a dread settling in his gut, cold and heavy as lead. The executive wing felt different from every floor below it. Even the air seemed filtered, thinner, faintly scented with old leather, paper, and the cloying residue of ambition. The walls held originals, not least corporate abstractions. A stark Rothko brooded in low light, absorbing color and giving nothing back. His worn gray uniform chafed, a constant reminder of the disguise. Tonight, Project Keystone, his desperate attempt to see his company from the bottom up, felt less like curiosity and more like walking into a den. He paused to stretch against the cart, and his wrist caught the light, a scratched 1970s Timex Marlin. Humble, its leather straps softened by decades. His father's watch. He remembered receiving it at 16 in a garage that smelled of motor oil and cheap coffee. Integrity, his father had said, tapping the face. Be on time. Do the work. Be honest when no one's looking. This thing's never lied to me. To Caleb, it wasn't jewelry. It was a compass. The anchor to the Queen's mechanic's son who just happened to be worth $2 billion. Genevieve's voice slid in, a silken dagger. A Patek costs 100,000, Caleb. That's a rounding error. Stop embarrassing me. He could see her in their Upper East Side penthouse, vast, white, museum cold, always dressed for a camera, perfume like cold flowers and money. His modest tastes weren't quirks to her. They were insults, stains from a past she wanted erased. He had clung to the idea that if love wasn't there, at least respect was. Lately, even that had frozen. Then a soft sound cut through his thoughts. Muffled voices under the heavy oak door of Preston Sinclair's office. The COO should have been gone hours ago. This floor was meant to be empty, privacy protected by a precise cleaning schedule. Caleb's pulse quickened. Art wouldn't be curious. Art would keep mopping. But Caleb wasn't Art. He left the cart, its wheel squeaking once, too loud, and moved to the door with a stealth he didn't know he had. He pressed his ear to the wood and heard it. Genevieve's laugh, not the tinkling social one, but throaty and intimate, laced with a triumphant cruelty that raised the hair on his arms. Denial cracked. Nausea rose with the chemical bite of cleaning supplies, as the promise of what he might learn held him in place. Preston's voice followed, smooth as scotch. It's almost done, Jen. The seeds of the no-confidence vote are planted. The board is already spooked by the Q4 projections we leaked. A no-confidence vote, against him. The betrayal landed like a physical blow. This wasn't a private wound. It was a coup. His mind, CEO mind, started firing through shock, connecting anomalies, reassurances, the way Preston had insisted on lightening his load with final presentations. Rot wasn't in the foundations. It was in his inner circle, in his home. Then Preston, boasting. The manipulated earnings reports were a work of art. By the time forensic accountants figure it out, we'll be long gone. And the blame lands on Caleb's disconnected leadership. Forensic accountants. The phrase turned the air to ice, but the true horror came next, delivered in a conspiratorial whisper. And the best part is the employee pension fund. Once the board ousts him and we take control, we liquidate it. Transfers through shell companies and it vanishes. By the time anyone notices, we're on a beach in a country with no extradition. Rage surged, cold, violent, clarifying. He thought of the faces he'd nodded to as art, people counting on that money for college, chemo bills, retirement. This wasn't just theft from him, it was the gutting of thousands of lives. Genevieve sighed, the venom almost lazy. Finally. I can't wait to be rid of that boring, sentimental man and his disgusting cheap watch. You, Preston, you look the part. You carry wealth like you were born to it. Contempt, bottomless and clean. The watch, his father's integrity, was disgusting to her. His humility was boring. He wasn't a husband. He'd been a machine she used to manufacture a life she wanted. The final sound sealed it. The wet smack of a long kiss, then Preston's low murmur. Caleb stumbled back, hip clipping the cart. Metal clanking, dirty water sloshing like a gunshot in the hallway silence. Inside the office, everything stopped. Listening. Panic hit. Sharp and immediate. If they opened the door, they wouldn't see Caleb Hayes. They'd see Art. Powerless, invisible, who'd overheard everything. He grabbed the cart and fled, the rogue wheel shrieking now, echoing the scream he kept trapped in his throat. He didn't stop until Queens, his small, unassuming apartment, door bolted, chain drawn. Here the air smelled of old books, brewing coffee, and wood polish. His father's cracked leather armchair waited in the corner like a relic of a man who never lied. Caleb stared into the cheap mirror. The cap, the fake beard, the exhausted face of Art. Beneath it, the CEO, the husband, the man whose world had just been demolished. The rage faded, not into relief, but into something colder and far more dangerous. Calm. They thought he was a boring, sentimental obstacle. They had no idea who they were dealing with. He walked back into the living room and carefully took off the Timex watch, placing it on the worn wooden surface of his coffee table. The low light from a street lamp outside caught the scratched crystal, making it gleam like a dull, knowing eye. The watch seemed heavier now, imbued with a new and terrible significance. It was no longer just a memento of his father. It was a declaration of war. It was the physical embodiment of everything Genevieve and Preston despised. And therefore, it was the symbol of everything he now had to fight for. It represented the pension fund they planned to steal, the honest employees they planned to ruin, and the integrity they believed was a weakness. He ran his finger over the worn leather strap, the same way his father used to. The simple, mechanical ticking was a steady, resolute rhythm in the silent room, a counterpoint to the chaotic storm of betrayal in his mind. This watch had been built in the 1970s, a simple, reliable machine designed to do one thing: tell the truth. And that, he realized, was exactly what he was going to do. He would not be driven by rage or by a desire for petty revenge. He would be driven by a cold, relentless pursuit of justice. The game was on, and he was going to use their own arrogance and greed against them. A plan began to coalesce in his mind, not in a flash of inspiration, but with the slow, deliberate precision of an algorithm processing data. He was a systems architect, a builder of complex logistical networks. This betrayal was just another system, a corrupt one, and he would dismantle it piece by piece. Rage was an inefficient fuel. It burned hot and fast, leading to mistakes. What he needed now was ice. He crossed the room to a dusty bookshelf and pulled out an old encrypted laptop that hadn't been used in years, a relic from his early coding days. He sat in his father's armchair, the worn leather groaning under his weight, and powered it on. The screen bathed his face in a cold blue light, reflecting a look of intense, focused determination. He wasn't thinking about the affair anymore, or the personal insults. He was thinking about data trails, offshore accounts, and the intricate web of deceit Preston had woven. He would treat this as the most complex logistical challenge of his career, tracking a shipment of stolen assets and ensuring it was delivered directly to the authorities. His fingers flew across the keyboard, his movements swift and certain. He was no longer Art the janitor or Caleb the heartbroken husband. He was Caleb Hayes, founder and CEO of Axiom Dynamics, and he was about to remind everyone what happened when you tried to break the machine he had built. His first move was to contact Marcus Thorne, the head of security at Axiom, and the only other person on the planet who knew about Project Keystone. He didn't use a phone or a corporate email. That would be too risky. Instead, he sent a single coded message through a defunct, peer-to-peer messaging app they had set up as a dead man's switch years ago. The message was simple: Keystone compromised. Initiate Protocol Phoenix. Midnight at the Old Yard. The Old Yard was a defunct rail depot near the river, a place of ghosts and rusting metal, the perfect location for a conversation that could never be overheard. Marcus was ex-military intelligence, a man whose loyalty was absolute and whose paranoia was a professional asset. Caleb knew that Marcus would understand the gravity of the message immediately. Protocol Phoenix, was their ultimate contingency, a plan for a catastrophic internal threat. They had designed it as a theoretical exercise, a war game for a faceless enemy. Caleb never imagined he would be activating it against his own wife and his second-in-command. The wait for a reply was agonizing, each minute stretching into an eternity. He stared at the screen, the blinking cursor a tiny, mocking metronome, until finally, a single character appeared in response. A simple, affirmative K. The first piece was now in motion. The next step required a level of financial firepower that only his personal wealth could provide. He couldn't use corporate resources. Preston had his eyes on every dollar flowing through Axiom. Working from his encrypted laptop, Caleb began the process of hiring the most ruthless forensic accounting firm in the world. A discreet group of digital bloodhounds based out of Geneva, known only as the Vespers. They were obscenely expensive and operated with the moral ambiguity of mercenaries, but their results were legendary. He routed the payment through a series of shell corporations of his own, legitimate ones he used for venture capital investments, making the transaction utterly untraceable back to him. The brief he sent them was encrypted and brutally simple. Axiom Dynamics, target, Preston Sinclair, COO. Find the architecture of his planned liquidation of the employee pension fund. I need every wire transfer, every hidden account, every shell company. Discretion is paramount. The price is no object. He was unleashing sharks into the water, and he knew they would smell the blood Preston and Genevieve had so carelessly spilled. He was building his arsenal in the shadows, crafting a weapon of pure, undeniable fact that would be impossible to refute when the time came. The days that followed were a masterclass in psychological torture. He had to live a double life with an intensity that made his janitorial charade feel like a vacation. By night, he was still Art, mopping the floors, a ghost in his own company, his ears open, gathering whispers and observing the subtle shifts in the corporate atmosphere. He saw the new confidence in Preston's walk, the smug, proprietary way he surveyed the executive floor. By day, he was Caleb Hayes, the slightly disconnected, work-obsessed CEO. He sat in board meetings with Preston, listening to his COO present the falsified Q4 projections with a smooth, convincing veneer of concern. He had to nod, ask the right questions, and feign ignorance, all while a cold, murderous fury simmered just beneath the surface. Each of Preston's smug smiles was a new twist of the knife. He had to force himself to look the man in the eye. The man who was sleeping with his wife and planning to destroy the lives of his employees, and pretend that all was well. The strain was immense, a constant, crushing pressure on his chest. He felt like a deep-sea diver, the darkness and pressure threatening to implode him at any moment, but he held his breath and kept going deeper. The nights at the penthouse were the worst. He had to share a bed with Genevieve, to breathe in the scent of her expensive perfume, now a sickening reminder of her betrayal. She was different, a light with a triumphant energy she barely bothered to conceal. She chattered incessantly about the upcoming Axiom Innovators Gala, the annual black tie event at Cipriani Wall Street. She obsessed over her dress, the guest list, the seating chart. "It's going to be Preston's big night," she'd said one evening, a sly, knowing look in her eye. He, the sun, had not yet breached the horizon, but a sterile, gray light already filled the penthouse, reflecting off surfaces so polished they seemed to hold no warmth. This wasn't the gentle light of dawn. It was the cold, analytical glow of New York City itself, filtered through floor-to-ceiling windows that looked out over a sleeping Central Park. Caleb Hayes moved through the cavernous space with the practiced silence of an intruder in his own home. The air, meticulously climate-controlled, carried no scent of life, no lingering aroma of coffee, no trace of last night's dinner, only the faintest, almost imperceptible hint of Genevieve's jasmine and sandalwood night cream from the master suite. The floors were a vast expanse of white Italian marble, so cold under his bare feet that it seemed to leach the heat directly from his bones. He bypassed the kitchen, a gleaming testament to brushed steel and minimalist design that was never used for anything more complex than chilling champagne. His destination was a walk-in closet the size of his childhood bedroom, a meticulously organized cathedral of designer labels. He ignored the rows of bespoke suits and handmade Italian shoes, heading instead to the very back, behind a rack of ski jackets they hadn't used in years. There, tucked away on the floor like a dirty secret, was a simple, olive-drab canvas backpack, its leather bottom scuffed and faded, its zippers thick and utilitarian. He hoisted it, the familiar weight a strange comfort. Inside was his other life, a worn gray janitor's uniform, a pair of scuffed work boots, a simple wallet with a fake ID bearing the name Arthur Vance, and a thermos of black coffee. The act of opening the bag felt like a ritual, a quiet shedding of one skin for another, and he found himself wondering which man was the real disguise. He carried the backpack into the main living area, the rough canvas a jarring textural contrast to the plush white velvet of the sofas. He laid out the uniform on a chaise lounge that had likely cost more than his father's first car, the simple gray fabric looking almost obscene in the opulent surroundings. As he began to unbutton his silk pajama top, a soft sound from the hallway made him freeze. Genevieve stood there, framed in the doorway, a vision in an ivory silk robe that cascaded to the floor. She wasn't looking at him, not directly. Her gaze was fixed on the worn-out Carhartt jacket he had draped over the back of a chair. Her lips curled into a faint, almost imperceptible sneer of disgust. The jacket was his armor against the city's early morning chill, its tough canvas softened by years of wear, a small, self-stitched patch covering a tear on the left sleeve. To him, it smelled faintly of home, of motor oil, autumn leaves, and the honest sweat of a day's work. To her, he knew, it smelled of failure, of the blue-collar queen's past he refused to fully renounce. She said nothing, her silence a weapon she wielded with surgical precision. It was a silence that screamed his inadequacy, that condemned his simple tastes as a personal affront to the grand, glittering narrative she was trying to build for their lives. He felt a familiar flush of heat crawl up his neck, a mixture of shame and a deeply buried resentment. He was the architect of this gilded cage, yet he was made to feel like a trespasser within it every single day. If you enjoy stories of karma, hidden secrets, and the quiet power of the underestimated, subscribe now to witness how the truth always finds a way to surface. Finally, her eyes moved from the jacket and settled on his wrist. "Are you really going to wear that thing?" The words were spoken softly, almost a whisper, yet they landed with the force of a slap. She was looking at his father's watch, the 1970s Timex Marlin. It was a humble object, its stainless steel case bearing the fine scratches of a lifetime of use, its acrylic crystal holding a deeper gouge near the 2 o'clock mark from a slipped wrench decades ago. The leather strap was dark with age, softened and molded perfectly to the shape of his wrist. He could feel its steady, mechanical tick, a tiny rhythmic heartbeat that had been a constant in his life since he was 16. It was the physical manifestation of his father's most important lesson. Integrity is what you do when no one is watching. Genevieve saw none of this. She saw only a cheap, outdated accessory that clashed with their $2 billion net worth. "A Patek Philippe costs $100,000, Caleb," she continued, her voice laced with the weary condescension of a parent explaining something obvious to a slow child. "That is a rounding error for us. Can you please, for the love of God, stop embarrassing me?" The words hung in the sterile air, a perfect encapsulation of the chasm between them. He wasn't just wearing a watch. He was committing a social crime, a deliberate act of class treason that she could not abide. He didn't argue. He had learned long ago that arguing with Genevieve was like trying to reason with a hurricane. Her convictions were not built on logic, but on a deep pathological need for external validation. Any defense of his values was perceived as a direct attack on hers. So he remained silent, his face a carefully constructed mask of neutrality. But inside, his mind was whirring, processing, analyzing. This was no longer just a marriage. It was a long, cold war of attrition, and he was a deep cover agent in his own life. Every sneer, every condescending sigh, every cutting remark was a piece of data he collected and filed away. He was beginning to understand that her contempt wasn't just about his taste in watches or coats. It was a fundamental rejection of his very identity. She had fallen in love with the founder of Axiom Dynamics, the billion-dollar prodigy, but she was pathologically repulsed by Caleb Hayes, the mechanic's son. He slowly pulled on the Carhartt jacket, the rough fabric a grounding sensation against his skin. He zipped it up, the sound of the heavy brass zipper unnaturally loud in the oppressive silence. He then shouldered the canvas backpack, its weight settling across his back like a penance. He was allowing her to believe she was winning, letting her think he was weak, submissive, and beaten down by her relentless campaign of quiet humiliation. It was a dangerous game, but he knew, with the cold certainty of a systems analyst, that her arrogance was the single greatest vulnerability in her defense. He walked toward the massive, soundproof door of the penthouse, his work boots making soft, apologetic sounds on the marble floor. He could feel her eyes on his back, a palpable force of judgment, and disappointment. He reached for the cold, steel handle, his hand hesitating for a fraction of a second. This was the moment of transition, the moment he left the sterile prison of his success and entered the gritty reality of his mission. As his fingers closed around the handle, her voice cut through the silence one last time. Not angry, but bored, dismissive, as if she were talking to the household staff. Try not to bring the smell of wherever it is you go back into the apartment. He didn't turn around. He didn't give her the satisfaction of seeing the flash of pain in his eyes. He simply pulled the door open and stepped out into the private, softly lit hallway, pulling it shut behind him. The door closed with a heavy, satisfying thump, the sound of a vault being sealed. He was alone now. The cold marble and silent air of the hallway, a mirror of the apartment he had just left. He reached up and pulled the cheap, nondescript baseball cap from his backpack, settling it low over his eyes. The boring, sentimental man was gone. Art the janitor was on the clock, and he had a long night of work ahead of him. He abandoned the cart, its rogue wheel giving a soft, protesting squeak that sounded like a gunshot in the oppressive silence. He moved toward Preston's heavy oak door with a stealth he didn't know he possessed, his soft-soled work boots making no sound on the polished stone. The wood was cool and solid against his cheek as he pressed his ear to it, the faint vibrations of the voices traveling through the dense material into the bones of his skull. He held his breath, the sound of his own blood roaring in his ears, a frantic internal ocean against the muffled, conspiratorial tones seeping through the door. For a moment, he could only make out the rhythm, the cadence of their speech, Preston's smooth, confident baritone, and a higher, feminine pitch he couldn't immediately place. He closed his eyes, focusing, trying to filter out the low, omnipresent hum of the building's climate control. The smell of lemon disinfectant and old leather seemed to intensify, becoming sharp and cloying in his nostrils. He was just Art, the janitor. Art wouldn't be curious. Art would just keep mopping, his world confined to the squeak of his cart and the scent of ammonia. But he wasn't Art. He was Caleb Hayes, the CEO and owner of this entire building, and there were people in his COO's office long after midnight. Every instinct, honed by years of navigating the cutthroat corporate world, screamed that something was fundamentally wrong. Then he heard it, a sound that cut through the muffled tones like a shard of glass. Genevieve's laugh. It wasn't her public, tinkling laugh, the one she deployed at charity galas and investor dinners. This was different. It was throaty, intimate, and laced with a triumphant cruelty that made the hairs on his arms stand up. It was a sound he had never heard before, yet it felt like a confirmation of a fear so deep he had never dared to give it a name. The laugh was a key, unlocking the words that followed, making them terrifyingly clear. Preston's voice, smooth as single malt scotch, the cultivated, confident cadence of a man who had never known a day of real struggle. It's almost done, Jen. The seeds of the no-confidence vote are planted. The board is already spooked by the Q4 projections we leaked. The words were clinical, detached, but they hit Caleb with the force of a physical blow. A no-confidence vote. Against him. Preston, his protege, the man he had mentored and trusted, the man he had promoted to chief operating officer over more experienced candidates because he saw a spark of himself in him. Or so he had thought. The air in Caleb's lungs seemed to turn to ice. He flattened himself further against the door, his mind racing, trying to process the sheer scale of the betrayal. This wasn't just a personal indiscretion. This was a corporate coup. Preston and his own wife were conspiring to strip him of the company he had bled for, the empire he had built from a single algorithm he'd coded in his tiny Queens apartment. The manipulated earnings reports were a work of art, Preston boasted, his voice thick with smug satisfaction. By the time the forensic accountants figure it out, we'll be long gone, and the blame will land squarely on Caleb's disconnected leadership style. Forensic accounting. The term hung in the air, a technical, sterile word for a profound and devastating act of sabotage. The cold marble floor seemed to tilt beneath his feet, the secure foundations of his world dissolving into a treacherous abyss, and he could feel the steady, reassuring tick of his father's watch against his wrist, a frantic, tiny heartbeat counting down the seconds to the complete and utter demolition of his life. The true dagger, however, was yet to come. It wasn't about the money or the company, not really. It was about the people, the thousands of employees who trusted him, who had invested their careers and their futures in Axiom Dynamics. And the best part, Preston continued, his voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper that was somehow more chilling than a shout, is the employee pension fund. Once the board ousts him and we take control, we'll liquidate the entire fund. A few well-placed transfers through a series of untraceable shell companies, and it vanishes. By the time anyone raises an alarm, we'll be on a beach in a country with no extradition treaty. A cold, visceral rage, unlike anything Caleb had ever experienced, surged through him. This was not just a white-collar crime. It was pure, unadulterated evil. He thought of Maria from accounting, who was putting 3 kids through college. He thought of Dave from engineering, who was counting on that pension to care for his sick wife. He thought of the faces he saw every day, the people he shared nods and quiet greetings with in the hallways as Art. Preston and Genevieve weren't just planning to steal from him. They were planning to gut the lives of thousands of innocent people for a payday. Then, Genevieve's voice again, dripping with a venom that seemed to curdle the very air. Finally, she sighed, a sound of profound, ecstatic relief. I can't wait to be rid of that boring, sentimental man and his disgusting cheap watch. You, Preston, you actually look the part. You carry wealth like you were born to it, not like you're constantly apologizing for it. The words were perfectly aimed stilettos, piercing through his last defenses, and the final, sickening sound was the unmistakable wet smack of a long, passionate kiss. That sound, so intimate and so utterly alien in this corporate setting, was what finally broke Caleb's paralysis. It was a punctuation mark on their betrayal, a seal on their monstrous pact. He stumbled back from the door, his body moving on pure, animal instinct, his mind a white-hot blank of shock and fury. His hip bumped hard against the janitorial cart, and the metal bucket of dirty water sloshed, its wire handle clanking loudly against the steel frame. The sound was an explosion in the dead quiet of the hallway, a catastrophic breach of his stealth. Inside the office, the voices stopped abruptly. A dead, listening silence fell, a silence so profound it felt like a physical pressure against his eardrums. Caleb's heart hammered against his ribs, a frantic drumbeat of pure panic. He was caught. They would open the door and find him, not Caleb Hayes, the billionaire CEO, but Art the janitor, a powerless, invisible man who had overheard everything. He could picture the scene. The door swinging open, Preston's smug face contorting first in annoyance, then in dawning recognition. Genevieve's look of horror. The janitor would be fired, of course. But what then? Would they suspect? Would they realize the monumental, catastrophic mistake they had just made in underestimating the man who mopped their floors? He had to get away, to disappear back into the shadows before they could see his face, before they could connect the sound in the hallway to the eventual fallout of their crimes. He grabbed the cart, his hands trembling so badly he could barely grip the handle, and practically ran, the squeaking wheel, now a frantic, high-pitched shriek that echoed his own silent scream down the long, empty corridor. He didn't stop until he was safely back in his small, unassuming apartment in Queens. The door bolted, the chain drawn. The contrast between his 2 worlds had never been so jarring. Here, the air smelled of old books, brewing coffee, and the faint, comforting scent of wood polish. It was a space defined by function and memory, not by aesthetic or status. His father's old armchair sat in the corner, its leather cracked and worn in the shape of a man long gone. This was his sanctuary, the place where he could shed the weight of being a billionaire CEO. But tonight, it offered no comfort. He stumbled to the bathroom and stared at his reflection in the cheap builder-grade mirror. The face looking back was a mask. The fake beard, the tired lines around his eyes, the cheap cap. It was the face of Art, the janitor. But beneath it, he could see the CEO, the husband, the man who had just had his entire reality ripped out from under him. The panic from the hallway had subsided, washed away by a wave of adrenaline, and now, in its place, a chilling, terrifying calm began to settle. The emotional shockwave had passed, and all that remained was the cold, hard calculus of the problem. They thought he was a boring, sentimental fool. They thought he was a weak, disconnected obstacle to be removed. They had no idea who they were dealing with. He walked into the living room, sat in his father's armchair, and from a hidden compartment in a dusty bookshelf, he pulled out an old, encrypted laptop. It was a relic from his early coding days, a machine built for one purpose, to break complex systems. As the screen bathed his face in a cold, blue light, his fingers found the keyboard, and he began the first step of his invasion. A silent, digital declaration of war against the 2 people who had just tried to destroy him. The blue light of the encrypted laptop screen was a harsh, unforgiving illuminator, casting the small queen's apartment in a sterile, clinical glow. The initial shock, the white-hot flash of rage and the gut-wrenching nausea he'd felt outside Preston's office, had receded. In its place, a terrifying calm had settled deep in his bones, a coldness that felt more dangerous than any fleeting anger. He was no longer a husband betrayed. He was a systems analyst staring at a catastrophic failure. His marriage, his company, his entire life. It was all just a complex system that had been infected with a virus, and his job was to perform the autopsy, trace the infection to its source, and then eradicate it. He began not with Axiom's servers, but with something far more personal, and he suspected, far more carelessly guarded. Genevieve's personal cloud storage. He didn't need to hack it. He knew the answers to her security questions with the painful intimacy of a decade-long marriage. What was the name of your first pet? Princess, a fluffy white cat she'd adored. What is your mother's maiden name? Dubois, a name she always pronounced with an exaggerated French flourish. In what city were you born? A small, forgettable town in Ohio she'd spent her entire adult life trying to erase. Each correct answer felt like a small, personal betrayal, a weaponization of their shared history. With a soft click, he was in. Her digital life was laid bare before him. Neatly organized folders for social events, receipts for designer clothes, vacation photos. It was a monument to a life of curated perfection. Then he saw it. A folder innocuously labeled Household Admin. His finger hovered over the trackpad, a profound sense of dread washing over him. This was the point of no return, the moment he would willingly step through the looking glass. He clicked, and the contents populated the screen. There were no household bills or renovation plans. Instead, there was a series of email drafts, addressed to a name he recognized as one of the city's most ruthless divorce attorneys, dated as far back as 8 months ago. They weren't love letters to Preston. They were tactical briefings. He saw his own name, Caleb, mentioned repeatedly, not with affection or even anger, but with the cold detachment of a corporate asset being assessed for liquidation. He wasn't her husband. He was a problem to be managed, a financial obstacle to be overcome. The pain of the affair suddenly seemed trivial, a mere symptom of a much deeper, more malignant disease. He had been living with a stranger, a business partner who had been planning a hostile takeover of his life for the better part of a year. He scrolled further, his breath catching in his throat as he found a subfolder labeled simply, Contingency. And a new, colder fear gripped him as he realized the autopsy had only just begun. The contingency folder was not filled with emotional correspondence or scandalous photos. It was a war room, a meticulously organized arsenal of legal and financial weaponry aimed directly at his heart. The first document he opened was a scanned memorandum from the divorce attorney, summarizing their initial consultation. His eyes scanned the cold black text, his mind struggling to process the clinical dissection of his own character. The strategy was laid out in brutal detail. Paint him as an emotionally distant and negligent spouse whose fixation on his blue-collar origins and refusal to embrace their social standing had caused irreparable damage to the marital union. It was a narrative designed to maximize her alimony claim, a legal fiction crafted from 1,000 tiny moments of her manufactured discontent. He saw spreadsheets detailing every asset they owned, from their art collection to his private stock holdings, with specific items highlighted in yellow, the ones her legal team believed they could most easily claim. He felt a wave of vertigo, the words on the screen blurring for a moment. This wasn't a separation. It was an asset seizure. Then he found the document that made his blood run cold. It was a digital copy of an irrevocable deed transfer agreement for their Hamptons estate. He remembered the day she had presented it to him, just last month, her voice a silken purr as she explained it was a clever tax strategy recommended by their financial advisor. He remembered his hesitation, a small, nagging instinct he had foolishly ignored. He had almost signed it. The realization hit him with the force of a physical impact, knocking the air from his lungs. He had been inches away from willingly signing over a $10 million property to the woman who was actively plotting his ruin. The sheer, calculated audacity of it was breathtaking. The rage inside him began to change, the hot, messy emotions of betrayal cooling and hardening into something else, something sharp and precise. This was not a crime of passion. This was a long con, and he was the mark. He scrolled to the bottom of the folder and found one last file. this one protected by a secondary layer of encryption. The file name was not a string of words, but a complex alphanumeric sequence that he instantly recognized as the digital signature protocol used exclusively by Axiom Dynamics' senior executive team. Cracking Preston's encryption was like coming home. The chaotic storm of emotion in his mind went quiet, replaced by the familiar, comforting hum of pure logic. This was his language, the world of code and data where he was king. His fingers moved across the keyboard of the old laptop with a speed and certainty that felt instinctual. His mind a flurry of commands and counterprobes. He wasn't just breaking a password, he was dismantling a mindset, anticipating Preston's Ivy League arrogance, his predictable patterns, his belief in his own intellectual superiority. Preston would have used a system that was complex, but ultimately conventional, something from a textbook. Caleb, on the other hand, thought in ways textbooks hadn't yet conceived. After a few tense minutes, a soft click from the laptop's speakers signaled his victory. The file opened, and Caleb felt the last vestiges of his old life burn away in the cold glow of the screen. It was a PowerPoint presentation, the kind used for board meetings, with the sleek, minimalist Axiom Dynamics branding. The title slide read, "Project Sunset, a Strategic Restructuring." It was the entire playbook for the coup. He clicked through the slides, each one a fresh stab of betrayal. He saw the manipulated earnings reports, the cleverly falsified data points designed to create the illusion of a company in crisis. He saw a detailed analysis of the board of directors, with each member's name color-coded. Green for secured, yellow for leaning, red for hostile. He was horrified to see more green than any other color. But the true horror was waiting in the appendix. He found a series of slides detailing the planned liquidation of the employee pension fund. It wasn't a vague idea, it was a step-by-step operational guide. He saw the names of the shell companies, bland, innocuous names like Oceanic Holdings Limited and Alpine Ventures SA, and the corresponding account numbers for banks in the Cayman Islands and Zurich. The level of detail was sickeningly thorough. He pictured Maria from accounting, Dave from engineering, their faces, their families, their futures, all reduced to a single line item in a presentation designed to fund Genevieve and Preston's life of consequence-free luxury. At the bottom of the final slide, a single sentence was typed in the notes section. A message from Preston to Genevieve that made his blood freeze. G. See attached for the Keystone vulnerability. Our janitor friend has given us the perfect narrative. He clicked the attachment, a small paperclip icon that seemed to mock him with its mundanity. The file that opened was a dossier, a comprehensive, professionally compiled dossier on Art Vance. His heart, which had been beating with a cold, steady rhythm, began to hammer against his ribs. He saw a scanned copy of his fake ID, a detailed breakdown of his janitorial work schedule, and the address of his Queens apartment. There were grainy, long-lens surveillance photos of him leaving the building in the early morning hours, his shoulders slumped in the guise of a tired working man. They knew. They had known all along. The realization was a physical shock, a jolt of ice water through his veins. He scrolled through the pages, his mind racing, piecing together the fractured timeline of his own deception. Genevieve's constant complaints, her thinly veiled disgust, her probing questions about where he went so early in the morning. It wasn't just social snobbery, it was suspicion. She had hired a private investigator. His secret project, his one attempt to reconnect with the soul of his company, had been discovered, infiltrated, and weaponized against him. They hadn't tried to expose him. That would have been too simple. Instead, they had allowed him to continue his charade, to play the fool. They were using Project Keystone as the cornerstone of their narrative. The CEO is so disconnected, so lost in his own bizarre fantasy, that he's literally mopping the floors while his company burns. It was diabolically brilliant. The humiliation was absolute, a searing white-hot shame that threatened to consume him. He was not the hunter, he was the prey, observed and manipulated within a cage of his own making. The sense of being a fool, a blind king, was overwhelming, but as he stared at the photos of himself as art, another emotion began to surface, pushing through the shame, a pure, unadulterated, and perfectly focused fury. Then his eyes caught a detail in the financial section of the dossier, an invoice for the private investigator's services paid out from a recurring corporate expense account he knew for a fact Preston Sinclair did not control. The hunt was on. The feeling of being the hunted animal evaporated, replaced by the cold, thrilling focus of a predator who had just picked up the scent of its prey. That expense account was a thread, a single, carelessly left clue. and he was going to pull on it until their entire rotten conspiracy unraveled. He was back in his own territory now, the deep, complex architecture of Axiom Dynamics financial systems. Using a series of encrypted backdoors and legacy command line prompts he had coded into the system's foundation years ago, digital fingerprints only he could leave, he moved like a ghost through the servers. He was invisible, untraceable, a phantom in the machine he himself had built. He traced the payment for the private investigator, bypassing modern security protocols with archaic keys that no one but him even knew existed. The trail led him not to Preston's department, but to the office of a senior board member, a man named Walter Sterling. Walter, a man who had been his mentor, who had advised him since his startup days, who had sat at his dinner table and praised his vision. The betrayal was now systemic, a cancer that had spread far deeper than he had imagined. The no-confidence vote wasn't just a possibility anymore. It was an imminent, carefully orchestrated certainty. He stopped digging. The autopsy was complete. He had seen the full, grotesque anatomy of their treason. He had enough evidence to bury them all in legal proceedings for a decade. But a quiet, public execution in a courtroom wasn't enough. They had sought to humiliate him, to turn his own values into a weapon against him. He would return the favor. He created a new, encrypted folder on his desktop. He didn't label it evidence or legal. He labeled it simply Gala. One by one, he began to drag the files into it. The audio of Genevieve and Preston's conversation from the executive suite, which Marcus had surely secured by now. The damning emails between Genevieve and her lawyer. The irrevocable deed. Preston's entire Project Sunset PowerPoint. The bank statements for the shell companies. The investigator's dossier on Art Vance. He wasn't compiling a legal case. He was crafting a narrative. He was writing the script for the final devastating act of their story. The first pale gray light of dawn began to seep through the window of his Queens apartment, and for the first time all night, a slow, cold smile touched Caleb's lips. He finally knew how he was going to destroy them, and he would do it not in the shadows, but in the brightest spotlight imaginable. The first light of dawn was not a gentle awakening in Queens. It was a gritty, industrial gray that crept over rooftops and filtered through the blinds of his small apartment, illuminating dust motes dancing in the still air. The cold blue glow of the laptop screen finally died as Caleb closed the lid, the soft click echoing in the profound silence. The man who had sat in that chair all night, the victim, the fool, the ghost of a husband, was gone. In his place was a different entity entirely. A cold, calculating architect of consequences. He moved with a new economy of motion, a purpose that radiated from him like a low-frequency hum. He walked to the bathroom, not stumbling with fatigue, but with the steady gait of a soldier on a mission. The face of Art Vance, with its weary lines and scruffy beard, stared back at him from the mirror. He met its gaze for a long moment, a silent farewell to the man who had shown him the truth. Then, with methodical precision, he lathered his face with cheap drugstore shaving cream and began to shave. Each scrape of the blade was a deliberate act of erasure, stripping away the disguise, revealing the hard, angular lines of his own face beneath. He wasn't just removing a beard, he was shedding a skin, sloughing off the last vestiges of the passive, sentimental man Genevieve so despised. He worked in silence, the only sounds the rasp of steel on stubble and the rush of water in the sink. The man who emerged was leaner, colder, his eyes holding the flat, dispassionate focus of a predator. He dressed not in the bespoke suits of the CEO or the gray uniform of the janitor, but in an armor of anonymity. Dark, tailored trousers, a simple black cashmere sweater, and shoes that made no sound. He was a shadow, moving with intent. He placed his father's Timex watch back on his wrist, the worn leather a familiar grounding weight. It was no longer a symbol of sentimental weakness. It was his banner, the standard under which he would wage this war. He picked up the encrypted laptop, now his primary weapon, slid it into a slim leather briefcase, and walked out of the apartment, leaving the ghost of Art Vance behind forever. His first destination was not Axiom Tower, but a discreet, unmarked brownstone in the West Village, home to a private banking institution so exclusive it made the Swiss look gauche. He wasn't going there to ask for help. He was going to issue a series of commands that would trigger a financial earthquake. The interior of the brownstone was a study in monastic, old-money luxury. There were no tellers, no lines, no branding, only hushed corridors, antique Persian rugs that drank the sound of his footsteps, and the faint, pleasant scent of beeswax and old paper. He was met not by a receptionist, but by a silent, impeccably dressed man, who simply nodded and led him to a small, private office overlooking a walled garden. The room contained only a single mahogany desk and 2 leather chairs. A moment later, a man named Julien Dubois entered. He was thin, ageless, with pale, intelligent eyes, and the quiet, unnerving stillness of a man who regularly handled sums of money that could purchase small countries. Caleb felt a flicker of grim, private irony at the man's surname, the same as Genevieve's maiden name, a name she clung to as a life raft of imagined aristocracy. They exchanged no pleasantries. Caleb sat, placed his briefcase on the desk, and opened the encrypted laptop. He did not explain the reasons for what he was about to do. The why was irrelevant to a man like Dubois. Only the how mattered. With the calm, detached voice of a programmer dictating code, Caleb began to issue his instructions. He was not just moving money. He was re-architecting his entire financial existence. He instructed Dubois to liquidate his positions in several non-essential hedge funds, a move that would flood his personal accounts with 9 figures of liquid capital by midday. He then dictated the precise parameters for the creation of a new, completely firewalled entity, the Keystone Trust. It was to be an irrevocable trust, its sole beneficiary designated as the Axiom Dynamics Employee Relief and Pension Guarantee Fund, a fund that, until this moment, had not existed. He then began transferring the majority of his personal fortune, not the money tied up in Axiom stock, but his own liquid wealth, into this new trust. An act of such staggering financial magnitude that even Dubois' professionally placid expression tightened for a fraction of a second. He was building an impenetrable fortress around the very thing Preston and Genevieve sought to plunder, using his own fortune as the walls. The financial fortress was now impregnable, but he knew that was only the first line of defense. His next stop was a law firm housed in a pre-war building off Park Avenue, a place whose name was whispered with a mixture of fear and reverence in the boardrooms of every Fortune 500 company. The firm of Vance, Sterling, and Croft did not handle divorces. They handled corporate decapitations, hostile takeovers, and the kind of litigation that ended careers and dissolved empires. The irony of the senior partner's name, Vance, was not lost on him. He felt as if he were collecting pieces of his discarded identity and forging them into weapons. He was ushered into the office of Amelia Vance, a woman in her late 50s with sharp, intelligent eyes and a reputation for being surgically ruthless. Her office was not opulent. It was a fortress of dark wood and leather-bound books, smelling of old paper and victory. Caleb again bypassed the emotional preamble. He wasn't a wounded husband seeking solace. He was a client with a clear objective. He placed a single encrypted hard drive on her vast, empty desk. "On this drive," he said, his voice level and devoid of emotion, "you will find audio and video evidence of conspiracy to commit wire fraud, securities fraud, and embezzlement. You will find a detailed plan to illegally liquidate a corporate pension fund, complete with offshore account numbers and the names of shell companies. You will also find evidence of a conspiracy to defraud me in a pending marital dissolution, including premeditated asset concealment and a signed, but not yet executed, fraudulent irrevocable deed transfer." Amelia Vance listened without a word, her expression unreadable. She plugged the drive into her computer, her movements precise and economical. As she began to click through the files, the Project Sunset PowerPoint, the audio from Preston's office, the emails from Genevieve's lawyer, Caleb watched her face. He saw no shock, no pity. He saw only the faintest glint of professional appreciation in her eyes, the look of a master swordsmith admiring a perfectly forged blade. "My objective," Caleb continued, "is not merely to win. I want a series of legal instruments prepared but not filed, injunctions to freeze their personal and known corporate assets, a comprehensive non-disclosure agreement for Ms. Hayes that will carry penalties so severe she will be afraid to even think my name, and a notification to the SEC, the Southern District of New York, and the IRS, all to be filed simultaneously on my signal, and not a second before." He was not just hiring a lawyer. He was commissioning a weapon of mass destruction and setting it on a hair trigger. The logistics of the financial and legal assault were now in motion, but the final piece of the architecture was tactical. For this, he needed Marcus Thorne. Their meeting took place not in a sterile office, but in the skeletal remains of the old Hudson rail yard, a place of rusting steel giants and shattered windows, where the wind whistled a mournful tune through derelict train cars. The air smelled of rain, creosote, and decay. It was a place where things came to die, and Caleb found that fitting. Marcus was waiting for him, a solid, immovable presence leaning against a graffiti-covered boxcar. He was a man of few words, his past in military intelligence having stripped him of anything superfluous. Caleb didn't need to explain the betrayal. The activation of Protocol Phoenix had told Marcus everything he needed to know about the severity of the threat. "The Axiom Gala," Caleb began, his voice low against the wind. "That's the venue. Cipriani Wall Street." Marcus nodded slowly, his eyes scanning the perimeter out of habit. "Tight venue, high profile, lots of variables." "I'm not interested in variables," Caleb stated. "I'm interested in control. I need you to take over the event's AV systems. Completely. I want a dedicated, hard-lined feed from a laptop I will provide, bypassing their entire production setup. The feed needs to be switchable on your command, overriding whatever is on the main screen instantly and without fail. I also need you to control the house lights and the spotlights. On my signal, I want the entire room to go dark, save for a single spot." Marcus listened, his face impassive, but Caleb could see the gears turning in his mind. "And security?" Marcus asked, his voice a low rumble. "Preston will have his own guys there. They'll be expecting a smooth night. Your team will replace the internal security detail an hour before doors open," Caleb commanded. "Tell the event staff there's a credible threat. Use whatever protocol you need. I want your people on every door, on the stage, and one man assigned to me personally. No one gets on or off that stage unless I authorize it. No one touches the power or the AV board. This needs to be a closed system, Marcus. A perfectly controlled environment for a product demonstration." He was turning the gala, Genevieve's night of triumph, into a kill box, and Marcus was the man who would lock the doors. Returning to the penthouse was the hardest thing he had ever done. Stepping out of the private elevator, he was hit by the familiar sterile chill of the apartment, the air thick with the scent of Genevieve's expensive perfume. The transition was jarring, like stepping from the real world into a movie set. All the power he had just wielded, the billions he had moved, the legal armies he had mobilized, all of it seemed to dissolve as he crossed the threshold. Here, he was once again expected to be Caleb Hayes, the boring, disconnected husband. He found Genevieve in her dressing room, a space lined with mirrors and backlit shelves of designer handbags. She was on the phone with the gala's event planner, her voice a sharp, imperious staccato as she debated the merits of orchids versus lilies. She saw his reflection in the mirror and gave him a dismissive glance, a micro-expression of annoyance at his presence interrupting her important work. "Caleb, honestly, you look exhausted. You should try to get some rest before the gala. We need you to at least look the part of a CEO," she said, her attention already returning to her phone call. He felt a profound cosmic disconnect. He was standing in a room with a woman who had no idea that her entire world was balanced on a razor's edge, that he had spent the day building the very machine that would obliterate her. He had to force the muscles in his face to form a neutral expression, to nod, to play the part of the weary husband she expected to see. He felt like a bomb, ticking silently in the heart of her perfect, curated life. Every breath he took was a lie. Every moment of shared silence was thick with his unspoken knowledge. He walked past her into their cavernous bedroom, the cold marble floor a familiar shock to his system. He had to survive the next 48 hours, to maintain the fiction, to wear the mask of the fool one last time. He knew, with a certainty that chilled him to his core, that the performance of his life was about to begin. The day of the gala was a canvas of cold, brilliant blue, the kind of New York sky that seemed scrubbed clean by an Arctic wind, making the glass and steel of the city glitter with a sharp, unforgiving light. Caleb had spent the morning in the quiet anonymity of his Queens apartment, a command center of one, watching the digital tripwires he had set begin to activate. The final pieces of his counteroffensive were moving into place with the silent, inexorable logic of one of his own logistics algorithms. He was dressed and ready hours before he needed to be, the anticipation a low electric hum beneath his skin. It was then that his phone buzzed, a summons he had been expecting. The caller ID simply read, "Penthouse." He answered, his voice a carefully modulated tone of weary resignation. It was Genevieve. Her voice was brittle, devoid of any warmth, a transactional instrument. "The board meeting is over, Caleb. Preston and I are here with Mr. Davies. You need to come now. We have some documents for you to sign." It was not a request. It was a command, the final assertion of her new power. He walked into the penthouse an hour later, stepping into the heart of the enemy's territory for the last time. The vast white living room was arranged like a courtroom. Genevieve was seated on a white velvet sofa, a portrait of regal triumph, her posture perfect, her expression a mask of cold satisfaction. Preston stood by the floor-to-ceiling window, his back to the park, a dark, confident silhouette against the blinding afternoon light. Between them, at the glass coffee table, sat a man in a ruthlessly tailored sharkskin suit, his thin lips set in a predatory line. This was Davies, the divorce attorney. A thick, leather-bound portfolio sat on the table before him, its sheer bulk an act of intimidation. The air was thick with the scent of Genevieve's perfume and the faint, leathery smell of expensive legal documents, a sterile, suffocating combination that smelled like the death of a life. They didn't rise to greet him. They watched him approach as if he were a ghost, an inconvenient relic of a past they had already moved beyond. And he knew his performance as a broken man had to be utterly convincing. Mr. Davies gestured to the single, isolated chair opposite the sofa, an intentional staging that cast Caleb as the defendant. He sat, the cool leather a shock against his back. The lawyer's movements were precise and reptilian as he opened the portfolio. "Mr. Hayes," he began, his voice as dry as old paper, "we've tried to make this as clean and efficient as possible, to avoid any unnecessary unpleasantness." The word hung in the air, a veiled threat. He slid a stack of papers across the glass table, the sound a soft, sinister hiss. "This is a comprehensive marital settlement agreement." Caleb watched as the lawyer's manicured finger tapped on the first page. "Genevieve will be retaining this residence, the Hamptons estate, for which you will sign the final, irrevocable deed transfer today, and the art collection. The terms for alimony are outlined on page 4. They are, I assure you, generous and non-negotiable." Caleb feigned a slow, tired nod, his eyes scanning the pages without truly reading them. He already knew what they said. He had read the drafts on Genevieve's cloud. He saw the staggering financial demands, the punitive clauses designed not just to enrich her, but to cripple him. Then came the second stack of papers. "This," Davies continued, his tone hardening, "is your resignation from the board of Axiom Dynamics, effective immediately, along with a permanent and binding NDA that precludes you from discussing any aspect of the company, your departure, or your marriage to my client with any third party in perpetuity. The penalties for violation are significant." He could feel Preston's smirk without even looking at him, a burning point of heat on the side of his face. They were not just divorcing him. They were erasing him, silencing him, writing him out of his own story with the cold, brutal efficiency of a corporate restructuring. They were presenting him with the bars of his cage, and all he had to do was step inside and lock the door himself. He picked up the pen they offered him. It was a Mont Blanc, obscenely heavy and cold in his hand, a caricature of the power they now believed they wielded. He uncapped it, the soft click echoing in the cavernous silence of the room. He could feel their collective gaze on him, a palpable weight of expectation. He saw Genevieve's triumphant stillness, Preston's barely concealed impatience, Davies's professional focus. They were watching a man sign his own surrender, and their arrogance was so complete, so blinding, that they couldn't see the truth of the moment. They couldn't see that the pen in his hand was not an instrument of submission, but a trigger. With each signature, he was not relinquishing power. He was arming a trap. He signed the alimony agreement, the ink flowing black and final onto the page. "For Maria in accounting," he thought. He signed the deed transfer for the Hamptons house, his hand steady. For Dave, in engineering. He signed the NDA, its cage of silence a temporary inconvenience. For every employee counting on a pension. With every stroke of the pen, he pictured the faces of the people they intended to ruin. His own humiliation was a small price to pay. It was fuel. He pushed the final, signed document back across the glass table. He had given them exactly what they wanted. He had played the part of the defeated fool, the boring, sentimental man who was no match for their ambition. He saw the flicker of a triumphant smile pass between Genevieve and Preston, a silent, shared victory that was so premature it was almost pitiable. He had just handed them the sword, and they had no idea they were about to fall on it. Preston finally moved from the window, his posture radiating a smug, proprietary authority as he surveyed the room. His room now. He picked up the signed documents, his movements crisp and decisive, a new king taking possession of his throne. He didn't look at Caleb, addressing him instead through the lawyer. "Davies, have security escort Mr. Hayes from the building. His access has been revoked." The finality of it was designed to be the ultimate humiliation, to be cast out of his own home by his replacement. Genevieve rose from the sofa, her movements fluid and graceful, a queen who had successfully deposed her predecessor. "Your personal effects, the ones worth keeping anyway, will be sent to a storage unit," she said, her voice dripping with dismissive contempt. "You'll be notified of the location." Caleb stood slowly, his body aching with a fatigue that was both real and feigned. He allowed his shoulders to slump, his gaze to fall to the floor. He didn't fight. He didn't argue. He simply gave them the image of the broken man they so desperately needed to see. He turned and walked toward the massive front door, not looking back. He could feel their eyes on him, savoring their victory. As he reached the door, he paused and turned his head slightly, just enough to look at Genevieve one last time. "Enjoy the gala tonight," he said, his voice quiet, almost a whisper. "I hear it's going to be a very memorable evening." It was a line delivered with the perfect note of wistful regret, a final, pathetic plea from a man who had lost everything. But to him, it was a declaration of war, a promise of the beautiful, glorious destruction that was now only a few hours away. The grand ballroom of Cipriani Wall Street was a universe unto itself, a breathtaking cavern of Italian Renaissance architecture designed to make mortals feel small and money feel important. Soaring marble columns reached for a ceiling painted with celestial frescoes, and colossal chandeliers dripped with thousands of crystals, casting a warm golden light that made every jewel and every glass of champagne sparkle with borrowed fire. The air was thick and heavy, a complex perfume of expensive floral arrangements, seared filet mignon, and the collective scent of the city's elite, a blend of power, ambition, and 100 different designer fragrances. Preston Sinclair stood on the brightly lit stage, a conquering hero in a bespoke tuxedo, his voice resonating with practiced charisma as he delivered the final lines of his keynote address. He spoke of a bold new era of leadership and a dynamic vision for the future, each word a carefully polished lie that the room of investors, board members, and media personalities swallowed whole. In the front row, Genevieve watched him, her adoration a palpable force. She was radiant, a queen surveying her coronation, her diamond necklace catching the light and scattering it like captured stars. The applause, when it came, was thunderous, a wave of validation that washed over the stage. And in that precise moment, as Preston raised his hands in a gesture of humble triumph, the intricate plan Caleb had set in motion engaged. The house lights plunged into darkness, extinguishing the golden world in an instant, and the wave of applause died in a collective, confused gasp, a beat of pure black silence. Then, a single, harsh, white spotlight cut through the darkness, finding its target not on the stage, but at the far end of the ballroom. It illuminated a solitary, pathetic figure, Art the janitor, standing beside his squeaking, humble cart. The spotlight was a cruel, interrogating beam, pinning Caleb, or rather Art, against the oppressive darkness. He could feel hundreds of pairs of eyes on him, a physical pressure of confusion and annoyance. The silence in the cavernous hall was now absolute, broken only by the rhythmic, agonizingly slow squeak, squeak, squeak of his cart's rogue wheel as he began to push it forward. Each rotation of the wheel was a metronome marking the seconds of their disbelief. He moved not with the shuffling gait of a tired janitor, but with a slow, deliberate, and unstoppable purpose, a glacier of quiet intention carving a path through the frozen sea of black-tie guests. On stage, Preston's silhouette was rigid with fury. "Security!" he barked into the microphone, his voice a raw, ugly tear in the fabric of the elegant evening. "Get this man out of here, now!" Two burly men in dark suits detached themselves from the wall and began moving toward Caleb, their expressions grim. But before they could reach him, two other figures dressed in the same anonymous security attire, but moving with the unmistakable economy of motion of trained professionals, stepped into their path. It was Marcus's men. A silent, tense tableau played out in the half-light, a quiet assertion of a new authority. Caleb never stopped moving. He pushed the cart directly to the foot of the stage, the squeaking wheel finally falling silent. He left the cart there, a humble, ridiculous monument to his other life, and ascended the few steps to the stage. He walked directly to the podium, past a paralyzed Preston Sinclair, whose face was a mask of apoplectic rage. Caleb reached up, his movements unhurried, and slowly, deliberately, pulled off the cheap baseball cap, revealing his matted hair. Then, his hand went to his chin, and he peeled away the fake beard, the sound of the adhesive giving way a small, sticky rip in the profound silence. He leaned into the microphone, his voice, his real voice, amplified to fill every corner of the vast hall. "Integrity," Caleb Hayes said calmly, "is what you do when no one is watching." As the collective, room-shaking gasp finally erupted, the massive LED screen behind him, which had been dark, flickered to life, showing the grainy, damning image of the interior of Preston Sinclair's office. If you are enjoying this story of betrayal and calculated justice, please like this video. It helps us bring you more stories like this. The effect was instantaneous and absolute. The security footage played, the audio crystal clear in the acoustically perfect hall. The entire room heard Preston's smug plotting, the talk of manipulated earnings and no confidence votes. Then, they heard Genevieve's laugh, throaty, cruel, and utterly damning. Her words, "I can't wait to be rid of that boring, sentimental man and his disgusting, cheap watch," echoed off the marble columns, each syllable a sonic blow. Caleb watched her face from the stage. The radiant queen of moments ago had vanished, replaced by a waxen, terrified effigy. Her skin, so perfectly illuminated, now seemed translucent, the blood draining from it so fast he could almost see it happen. Her perfectly painted red lips parted in a silent, horrified "oh," her eyes wide with the dawning, catastrophic understanding of her own public execution. The video on the screen dissolved, replaced by a high-resolution scan of the emails between Genevieve and her divorce attorney, her own words outlining the strategy to portray him as a negligent spouse, magnified for all to see. Then came the irrevocable deed, followed by Preston's entire Project Sunset PowerPoint, each slide a nail in their corporate coffins. The names of the shell companies and their corresponding offshore bank accounts filled the screen, a monument to their greed. The murmurs in the crowd had turned into a roar of outrage. Phones were held aloft, their screens a galaxy of tiny lights recording the downfall. Preston stumbled backward from the podium, his mouth opening and closing like a fish, but no sound came out. His face had crumpled, the handsome, confident mask dissolving to reveal the terrified, cornered cheat beneath. As the final slide, a detailed ledger of the planned pension fund liquidation hung on the screen. The massive bronze doors at the back of the hall burst open. It wasn't event security. It was a team of men and women in dark suits, their movements sharp and purposeful, their jackets unable to conceal the outlines of the federal authority they carried. They moved through the stunned crowd like sharks through water, their eyes fixed on the stage. Caleb stood motionless at the podium, a figure of absolute calm in the hurricane he had unleashed, the steady, quiet ticking of his father's watch against his wrist, the only sound in his entire world. In the end, it wasn't the money that defined the victory, but the quiet, unshakable truth it protected. A fortune can be built and lost, but integrity, once sold, can never be bought back. The real wealth lies not in the numbers in an account, but in the values we refuse to compromise. A lesson some learn only when the cold steel of handcuffs meets their wrists. What do you think is the true measure of a person's worth? Share your thoughts in the comments below. 6 months later, the air no longer smelled of lemon disinfectant or expensive perfume, but of something far more real: gasoline, hot metal, and the rich, earthy scent of old leather. Caleb was not on the 80th floor of a skyscraper, but on the grease-stained concrete floor of a sprawling garage in Queens, the very same one his father had worked in for 40 years. He had bought it, not as a nostalgic folly, but as an anchor. The late afternoon sun streamed through the grimy, wire-reinforced windows, illuminating a universe of dust motes dancing in the air and casting long shadows from the hydraulic lifts and tool chests. He was lying on a creeper, his knuckles scraped and stained with oil, his focus narrowed to the intricate underbelly of a 1968 Ford Mustang, its cherry-red body a beacon of analog beauty in a digital world. The only sounds were the distant wail of a city siren, the soft classic rock playing from a battered radio, and the satisfying metallic click of his socket wrench tightening a bolt on the transmission housing. He slid out from under the car, his body moving with the easy grace of a man who was finally, completely at home in his own skin. On a nearby workbench, next to a scattered collection of gaskets and spark plugs, sat a tablet. Its screen was lit up with a news article from a financial journal. The headline, stark and clinical: Sinclair sentenced to 15 years in federal prison for Axiom pension fraud. Below it was a smaller related link to a gossip site, showing a grainy paparazzi photo of Genevieve. almost unrecognizable, leaving a small, run-down apartment building, her face pale and drawn, the designer clothes she wore looking like a costume on a ghost. He felt nothing. Not triumph, not pity, not even the ghost of a memory of love. They were just data points now, the logical conclusion of a corrupt algorithm. He wiped his hands on a red rag, the rough cotton a familiar comfort, and picked up a cold bottle of water. The simple act of feeling the condensation on the glass, the taste of clean, cold water, was a luxury more profound than any champagne he had ever tasted. He glanced at his wrist, at the familiar, scratched face of his father's Timex. Its quiet, ticking a steady, honest rhythm against the silence. The world now knew the truth of what had happened at the gala, but they would never understand the quiet, unseen justice that had followed in its wake. The true legacy of that night was not the downfall of two criminals, but the silent, powerful machine of restitution he had built in the aftermath. The Keystone Trust, funded with the lion's share of his personal fortune, was now a quiet legend within the walls of Axiom Dynamics. He picked up another tablet from the workbench, this one displaying the Trust's quarterly report. He scrolled through the anonymized case files, each one a life altered, a future secured. He saw a grant that had paid the full college tuition for the daughter of Maria from accounting. He saw a disbursement that had covered the experimental medical treatment for the wife of Dave from engineering, a treatment that was now showing remarkable success. He saw dozens of retirement accounts, once gutted by Preston's scheme, now made whole, their balances guaranteed by an impenetrable financial firewall. This was his real work now, not managing supply chains, but reinforcing the foundations of people's lives. Axiom was thriving under a new CEO, a woman he had promoted from within, a leader who understood that a company's greatest asset was its people. He remained the majority shareholder, an invisible, silent owner who received these reports and ensured the machine of integrity he had built continued to run flawlessly. He put the tablet down and turned his attention back to the Mustang. There was one final bolt to tighten. He fit the wrench, his muscles coiled, and gave it a final, firm turn. A perfect, solid connection. He stood up, walked to the driver's side, and reached through the open window to turn the key in the ignition. The engine, silent for a decade, hesitated for a heartbeat, and then roared to life, a deep, throaty, magnificent sound that vibrated through the concrete floor and up into his very bones. It was the sound of something broken being made whole again, of value being restored not through money, but through patience, skill, and an unwavering belief in doing the work. In the polished chrome of the side mirror, he saw his own reflection, a man covered in grease, smiling, his father's watch gleaming in the fading light, a quiet testament to the fact that some things had a price. But the things that truly mattered had a value that could never be calculated.